Welcome to this very special evening dedicated to sacred teaching and spiritual learning. About 3 years ago, I, for my own interests, I suppose, decided that I would volunteer to edit an issue of the CCR journal, of which I was involved, and I wanted to make sure that we had a series of materials around the whole nature of spiritual education, which had not really been published anywhere. I myself, I think, had a very good Jewish education as a young person, in that it impacted upon me, and I'm now a Jewish educator. So in many ways it was successful. However, none of that Jewish education in all the various places that I was involved really got to the heart of a spiritual search, or searching for the presence of God, or understanding the place and role of tefillah, of prayer, or of indeed fashioning a life of holiness that was commensurate with the spiritual search. So it felt very important to me that as a Jewish educator we should begin to think about what the nature and the outcome of Jewish education is all about. And so that was my intention behind the interest in putting together an issue of the journal, which is a journal really for Reform rabbis, but has a wider circulation too. And I decided that I would invite Rabbi Sandy Sasso, who many of you know as a foremost Jewish educator who has written books, children's books, and also is lecturing on the spiritual life of children. And together we decided we'd put out a call to see who would respond, and we thought we'd have a small issue, and we have a few articles, and then we could all go on with our lives. Well, 2 years later, we got enough to fill 2 volumes. We would like to ask the question, what would Jewish education look like if it had at its heart a Jewish spiritual pedagogy, if it cared as much for enriching souls as it did for expanding knowledge, if it offered not only ritual practices, but purpose to our hands, feet, and speech? What is it we are seeking to achieve in Jewish education? Do we believe that spirituality is innate and needs to be nurtured, or that it is something that must be explicitly taught? Do we currently look for ways to deepen Jewish practice, to go beyond performance to the experience and meaning underlying it? Do we seek to create religious individuals, open minds, Jewish souls, and foster communities of holiness?
I was a Hebrew school kid from Newark, New Jersey, and between Hebrew school and Ramah is really what was responsible for my Jewish education. And it was a very good Jewish education. I learned Hebrew and I learned a lot, but issues of spiritual life were not raised at all. I think if I look at myself, I would have to say it must have been innate, or it must have been the circumstances of my own life that made me a spiritual seeker. Certainly not anything that anybody did for me in any kind of educational institution, not the Jewish ones, not the general ones, until I got to university. I came to Brandeis. I was a young 16-year-old freshman at Brandeis and began studying with Nachum Glatzer, who had been Franz Rosenzweig's student in Frankfurt, and then I had the great good fortune to have Professor Alexander Altman come from England when I was a junior in college. He taught the first class in Jewish mysticism ever taught in an American university, and I was in that class. And somehow I just knew it was going to be my language for the rest of my life. But that was probably because I already was a seeker for other kinds of reasons. To be a rabbi, and I would say to be a Jewish educator too, you have to have a religious life of your own. This can't be just about something you do programmatically for others. It has to be a reflection of who you are and what your own spiritual life is. And therefore, training as a Jewish educator also means cultivating your own spiritual life. I've been attracted to Hasidism because I believe there's profound theological teaching there, profound spiritual message there, and that message can be and must be translated for Jews who live in the 21st century. Translated does not only mean from Hebrew words into English words, but means conceptually translated. You can't just give 18th century teaching whole cloth to 21st century Jews for many reasons. Attitudes toward non-Jews, attitudes toward women, exclusivism, triumphalism, various kinds of things just wouldn't work that are in those sources. But at the same time, they're tremendously profound ideas. And I'm happy to say that in the last couple of decades, I see more people both in the Orthodox community, of course, where there's more access to the sources, but even in the liberal community, quoting the Sfas Emes or the Ishbitzer or various Hasidic masters, even the period I'm now most interested, Rabbi Nachman is often quoted, I've written on him, but now the period I'm most interested in, the early Hasidic masters, you see are beginning to be rediscovered. The text is from the Me'orei Naim. Me'orei Naim is one of the classics of Hasidic literature, written by Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a famous town for a different kind of light. Before it was famous for a bad kind of light, it was a great Hasidic pilgrimage center. Michael asked me to find a text that was about this question of spirituality and education. What is the spiritual value of Jewish learning? And this text speaks to it just better than almost anything I know. The text he's commenting on, first of all, the passage from Avot. Rabbi Meir says, whoever studies Torah for its own sake, zochel dvarim harbeh, merits many things, but of course, dvarim will know means words as well as things, and that play between them takes place here. Such a person is called Rea Ahuv, Ohevet HaMakom, Ohevet HaBriot. Rea Ahuv, you are a beloved friend. The word Rea, we sometimes translate as neighbor, as in V'ahavta l'reach hakamocha, but in a wedding ceremony, Sameach Tesamach Re'im Ahuvim does not mean beloved neighbors. So Rea means somebody to whom you are close. Rea means I think friend is probably the best we can do. But it's Rea Ahuv, loving God. Rea Ahuv, Ohevet HaMakom, Ohevet HaBriot. You are a beloved friend, loving God and loving God's creatures. That's going to become important in a minute. And then such a person can be taught Razei Torah, Umelamdin lo Razei Torah, V'na'asa k'mayan hamitgaber, becomes a sort of a spring that flows on its own, a self-renewing spring. It says many other things. There's a long list of things a person gets for studying Torah, but these are a selection from them. God dwells within the word of Torah. When you speak words of Torah, placing your own chiyut, your own life energy into the word, you are able to cleave to the primal word, which is the word of God, that's how you cleave to God. You cleave to God through the word. The word becomes the means by which you cleave to God. This is the meaning of merits many dvarim. When you study Torah lishma, and now he tells you what Torah lishma means in the Hasidic meaning. It doesn't mean just for its own sake, but means Torah l'shem hey. Lishma, the word lishma, for its own sake is divided l'shem hey, and the hey is the Shekhinah. The hey is the last letter of God's name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and the last letter represents the Shekhinah who was separated, who was exiled, who represents the oral Torah. Studying Torah for the sake of Hey really means studying for God's sake. You study as a religious act. Study is a sacred act. Study is a mitzvah, and God is present in the act of study. And that, of course, is everything we're talking about today. When you become a friend of God, I want to stop there because friend is not a language we often find in Jewish sources about you and God. Right? There's parent-child, there's king-subject. Once in a while there's lover, beloved, lechadodi. We address God as lover, yes. But Rea, God to be God's friend, is something, it's rather unusual. Whoever studies Torah for its own sake loves all people. Siman gadol. One who doesn't love all people like his own soul is not yet studying Torah for its own sake. It's just, he lays it out there very clearly. If you meet somebody who doesn't love everybody, kinafsho, then that person is not engaged in Torah Lishma. You can't be. Because being engaged in Torah L'Shem Hey, for the sake of the Shekhinah who is everywhere, the whole earth is filled with God's glory, the Shekhinahs and everything. If you don't love every creature, you don't see the Shekhinah in every creature, then you haven't yet learned how to do this, studying Torah L'Shem Hey. In the end, he makes the distinction between a bor and a be'er. A bor is a cistern, and a be'er is a well. In a cistern, there's just as much water in it as you put in, right? But if you take a bor, a cistern, and add the olive to it, which means, of course, the presence of God, then the bor becomes a be'er, and that's a be'er that has no end. That's a well where you can constantly get more and more water. So in training yourself to be a Jewish teacher, become a be'er, not just a bor. It's not just how much you absorbed and are storing there, but how much you have opened yourself to become a source of living waters.
Authenticity is really important, and it doesn't mean that they will necessarily want an answer. You know, it's interesting because, as Art Green said, you know, studying Torah and learning Torah for Torah's sake, it makes you the kind of person that you should be. I think the teens in some ways get that. That appeals to teens. The answers and questions are at school. One of the things that fascinates me, and it's fascinating more and more, it's an area I want to explore more actually, is that synagogues have done a really great job at avoiding the reason that they existed, to do something different than everybody else. We've tried for the last 100 years in Jewish education in synagogues to replicate what's going on outside in the secular world. And we've done, you know, some stuff fairly well. But we've taken away what's unique about us that the schools can't offer. So that's what I'm trying to bring back to the teens. We don't have to work very hard or search very hard to find that special connection. All we have to do is we have to be authentic about it, and we have to find the right people and train them to guide. I really see teachers here as more guides than as, I mean, they do teach, and obviously the kids want, but different kids want different things, and we've got to be able to understand that as well. There are some that are coming for intellectual stimulation, or because they want to study Torah, or they want to study Ivrit, and that's great. But there are also kids that are coming because it's just communal, they've got friends, and that's important to them because they don't have Jewish friends in their class or at their school. And that's important too, and we need to meet all those needs when they come along.
A series of questions that we were playing with and trying out in this curriculum, this experiment that we ran. Can we trust kids to know something about what they want to learn? Can we manage our anxiety as educators enough to let students guide their own learning about faith? Could that modeling actually serve to strengthen their faith as we allowed them in a supportive environment to reflect on ideas together? And one more, can we make time or see value in doing serious, regular evaluation of our own teaching work with a colleague who will push us to be much better? And I think in this brief experiment, our answer to all of these questions is yes. At the beginning of each class, I invited students to spend a few quiet minutes responding to a text or a question. Questions or texts like, what do you believe about God? Rambam's 13 Principles. A text from Harold Kushner's When Children Ask About God. A question like, how is the God of the Torah the same or different from God in your experience? And they'd have a few minutes to write and respond to that text or question. And after a few minutes, I invited them to open discussion and share their ideas about the text. And then for the next 40 minutes or so, I said almost nothing. I just listened, and I took notes. I took CPE in rabbinical school, some of the best learning I did, and we had to give verbatim reports of interactions. And so essentially I became a recorder of the conversation. Occasionally I would, if the conversation stopped, I would try and just name some of the things that had just been said to try and get the conversation back up and running, but pretty much I didn't talk during that time. And then toward the end of the class, each session, I'd ask them to return to their writing from the beginning of the class, adding or refining their thinking based on what had happened in the context of the conversation. I'd like to, in just a few moments, share a few reflections on what I observed in the classroom and my own experience reflectively and in the evaluative sessions with Wendy. Within the classroom space, the kids guided the conversation in really beautiful ways. Where had they taken, what kind of journey had they taken us on? Me, us, each other, and where were they pointing? And then I would throw out a text, And they would either respond to that text, or they would somehow naturally let me know that that wasn't the text of the class. And they would take us on a different journey. And it was quite amazing. By the end, and we just want to share a few reflections of what they wrote at the end, each student expressed that they had been changed in some form or fashion by the conversation and also the process, and they each also found ways to express a kind of gratitude and an ability to be more open to the ideas of others.
A man lost his way in a great forest. After a while, another lost his way and chanced on the first. Without knowing what had happened to him, the second asked the first the way out. "I don't know," said the first, "but I can point out the ways that lead further into the thicket, and after that, let us try to find the way together." So that's kind of the model for the action research, and I think it's a model for spiritual education, because certainly, you know, when I shared this with my husband, he said, "Well, but did you correct them if they said the wrong thing?" And I was like, "I don't know more about God than they know about God," you know. So I think, you know, just that kind of openness to exploring together is a healthy approach.
Having hard conversations about death and dying as early as possible can nurture a disposition of resiliency and empathy in kids and their families, and that it's actually not just about educating kids to live with the realities of life and death, but educating kids' parents and grandparents to live with these realities. But if we see that kids can articulate and have these deep, essential questions about life, why don't we have some major curricular resource for talking about them in Jewish settings? I pray that it results in what Charlie Brown coined best, and that Rabbi Green also said, that self-renewing wellspring of resilience of good grief. So,
one of my favorite questions to ask teens is, what is your spark? And when I ask that question of teens, they kind of say, well, what do you mean by spark? And then I say it again, what is your spark? And that makes them reflect upon what's their inner core, what do they want to become, what is it that nurtures and inspires them. And they find that to be a question that then generates an openness, Avira Ruchanit, I could call it now, that allows them to think about that. And then coupled with that, and I think that we've heard this, and for all of us involved in teen engagement, I think we really need to take note that teen engagement doesn't have to be empty of content. That the serious content, and in this case theology, is very much a part of what teens will engage with. That the notion of reflection and instruction, when put together with some sense of encounter that allows the openness to emerge, will provide a real, if you like, a curriculum domain that gives us a way to plan for explicitly trying to create this atmosphere that will allow young people, in this case teens, to really think hard and with the content connected to it. So I think we've learned some very important lessons about working in spiritual education and the ways to plan and be explicit about developing that intentionality.